You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. My name is Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. Today is February 9th, 2025, and this is episode 308 of Lighthearted. My co-host today is Judianne Point, first Vice President of the American Lighthouse Foundation and board member and volunteer for Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse in Rhode Island. Hi, Judianne.
Hi, Jeremy. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good in spite of the cold and wind here. It's wind's kind of howling. How are things down in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, not so windy here, but it's nice and sunny. It'll be a perfect day to go take my walk as soon as I'm done recording.
Sounds good. I just tried that, but I'm a baby when it comes to the wind, so I turned around after a few minutes and cut it short. But at least I was outside for a few minutes.
There you go.
So shortly, we're going to listen to a conversation with someone who is very near and dear to you and the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse, Alex Dias, who is the new chairman of the organization. For anyone who doesn't know, Pomham Rocks, that's P-O-M-H-A-M, Pomham or Pomham, there's always a debate on how to pronounce it, but Pomham Rocks Lighthouse is in Rhode Island in the Riverside section of East Providence. The American Lighthouse Foundation owns the lighthouse, and the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse are a chapter of the foundation. In the interview with Alex, we talked about the tours at the lighthouse, and Judianne, you and I have certainly talked about the tours on the podcast before, but people listening might not have heard about it before, and I want to make sure everybody knows. And I know you've been very involved with the tours. Can you tell me a little bit about the basics, how the tours work, and how people make reservations?
Yeah, sure. We use Fair Harbor. They are the online booking company. I did some research and found out that a lot of other lighthouses use them as well, and they have worked out beautifully. So if you go to our website, pomhamrockslighthouse.org, and you want to book a tour, you will see we have a tour page, but also on the homepage, you can find the little icon for Fair Harbor, and there'd be a calendar there. Right now, of course, we're not up and running as far as the tours go. Probably sometime in March, I'll get the calendar dates and everything on there. And then once you book it, the tour itself is about an hour and 45 minutes. You catch it at the Edgewood Yacht Club, which is right across the Providence River from the lighthouse. It's about a 10-minute boat ride over there. We take about 15 passengers, and the crew consists of a captain, a first mate, and 2 docents. So you're probably at the lighthouse on the island for about an hour and 20 minutes, where you get to see our wonderful museum. And if anybody has any questions when they get online there about the tours, we have an email, and I'm the one who answers them, and I usually get back to people right away.
Yeah, Rhode Island's quite rich in lighthouses. Some of the other lighthouses have probably gotten more publicity over the years, ones like Beavertail, the ones on Block Island, Rose Island, and so forth. But Pomham is one of the prettiest lighthouses anywhere. In fact, it's my wife Charlotte's favorite lighthouse, and we got to visit there together. But what was that now, 3 or 4 years ago? Yep. And I was also going to mention when people go there, as you said, there's a great museum. They can go up in the lighthouse, but on a nice day, it's an awfully nice place to just kind of hang out. I believe there's at least one bench outside, and it's just such a beautiful place to be. And people listening who might be planning a trip to Rhode Island absolutely need to book one of your tours. So before we introduce Alex, anything else you want to say about Pomham, or maybe any other lighthouses in your part of the world?
Well, first off, I want to say that your wife Charlotte has impeccable taste.
I knew that.
And yes, we do have Adirondack chairs actually all lined up outside. Yeah, it's really cool. Rhode Island's a very unique state. We are, after all, the ocean state, so we do have a lot of lighthouses. And what I love about them, they're all unique. And I'm not just talking about the architecture, but how they're run. They're all different groups of volunteers, different types of ownership. Some are privately owned. Most of them, I believe, are nonprofit. And we're starting to get to know each other better. For myself personally, I think it's through this podcast, because I've been doing some of those reports from Southern New England. And Alex knows a lot of people because he does a lot of research, and he's always looking for artifacts for our museum. And we've really begun to visit each other too. Rose Island came to visit us. The board of Beavertail came. So we're getting to know each other a lot better.
Yeah. Oh, Rose Island's they got a great organization, and Beavertail Lighthouse Museum Association, and the two lighthouses on Block Island. So it's a bunch of really, really strong groups, of course, including yours at Pomham Rocks. At this point, I think we should move along to our interview, which is, of course, Alex Dias. And Alex joined the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse in 2012, but his fascination with lighthouses goes all the way back to 2005 when he was in the 5th grade. And I remember, first meeting him when he was quite young. You're going to hear more about how he got started in the interview.
Yes, that was under the mentorship of David Kelleher, the legend.
Yep.
In 2015, Alex established the first official website for the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. He's been involved with virtually every aspect of the group, including the development of the museum inside the keeper's quarters, the ongoing restoration of the building inside and out, and helping to facilitate public tours. In fact, Alex has a captain's license and brings many guests out to the lighthouse, in addition to serving as a tour guide himself.
Yeah, he wears a lot of different hats for the organization.
That's for sure.
He became the chairman of the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse this past year. I believe he was the vice chairman for some time before that. And he's on the board of directors of the American Lighthouse Foundation. He received a Len Hadley Volunteerism Award from the American Lighthouse Foundation in 2017. Alex's brother Adam is also a volunteer and currently serves as the treasurer of Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. So I've known Alex for a number of years, but it was really nice to have this extended conversation with him. So let's listen to that now. I'm speaking this evening with Alex Dias down in Rhode Island, a couple hours south of where I am here. And of course, Alex is with the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. Alex, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
Good, thanks. Thanks so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. We have a bit of a scoop here. I understand that you just, like 2 days ago, became president of the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. Is that correct?
That's correct. This past Saturday.
Congratulations. That's fantastic.
Thank you.
You've done so much for the organization, so you certainly deserve that position. Before we go further, please clarify for me, do you say the name of the lighthouse Pomham or Pomham? Where do you come down on that?
I personally say Pomham, but I've heard both pretty much equally.
Okay. I'll try to go somewhere in between, I think.
Either one's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, Alex, I understand your interest in lighthouses goes way back, maybe to your childhood. Is that right? How did it all start for you?
It all started when I was in 5th grade, and at the time, the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse was just formed. And one of the founding board members, Dave Kelleher, came to my elementary school to do a presentation about how they were just starting their efforts to save the lighthouse. He brought in pictures, little models, and from there I was hooked. I found it fascinating that was in my town. It's not easily seen. You have to see it from the East Bay bike path. There's a lot of growth on the street, so you can't tell from just riding down on your car. From there, I got to watch the exterior restoration from shore, and then I had to do a project in high school. And from there, I decided to choose the lighthouse as my topic. And Dave was my mentor for that, and I got roped into the electrical cable project and into the interior restoration, and the rest is history, I guess.
Yeah, I know. I've known Dave for a long time. He's a great guy. And you mentioned the bike path. That's the first time I saw Pomham Rocks Lighthouse with my wife. We walked the bike path. I'll never forget that day because as we get a great view, it was fall. There was some beautiful fall foliage around. And a woman is walking towards us with a ferret on her shoulder. And she let us handle the ferret. So I associate Pomham Rocks Lighthouse with that experience of meeting a ferret up close and personal. So it sounds like that kind of led right into your involvement with the lighthouse after presentation by Dave and all that. You got involved at a pretty young age, right?
Yeah, at the time of the exterior restoration, I was 10. And when I actually started going out there doing things, I think I was maybe 15, 16. They put me right to work.
And you're what, mid 50s now? Is that right?
29.
Not quite. No, I knew you weren't anywhere near there. Just kidding. So let's talk about the lighthouse for a while. Plenty of history to talk about there. First of all, it was one of several lighthouses built on. Well, let me ask you another question before I get into that. Do you say that Pomham Rocks Lighthouse is on Narragansett Bay or on the Providence River? Which is it?
I say both. Technically, Narragansett Bay spans all the way from down Point Judith, Newport, Beavertail, all the way up to Providence. That's all considered Narragansett Bay. But the Providence River is, from a local perspective, is considered up to about Bullock's Point. Some extend it a little bit further south to Connecticut Point, but the majority say about Bullock's Point.
Okay. There was once a lighthouse at Bullock's Point as well, right?
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So there's a little bit you could say sort of an overlap between the river and bay in a sense.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Pomham was one of several lighthouses built in that area in the Pomham was 1871, right? And some of the others were built around that same time. Why were lighthouses needed there at that time?
Around that time frame, Providence, along with the coastal communities such as Riverside, East Providence, Cranston on the other side of the bay, they were becoming tourist spots. And back then, a lot of the people in the city were looking to escape during the summer. So you had amusement parks popping up, you had shore dinner halls, you had resorts. Around Pomham, there was docks being built to accommodate arriving passengers from Providence, New York, and the need for a lighthouse started to arise. There was a day beacon, there still is a day beacon in front of where the lighthouse is now, which was from 1828, but it was unlighted. And during that time frame of right after the Civil War, there was a boom of growth in the area, and the shipping traffic heavily increased. So lights were needed along the bay to help guide those ships in at night and during some stormy weather.
The day beacon you're talking about, it's known as the Pomham Rocks Day Beacon, correct? And it's
Pomham Beacon, yeah.
Pomham Beacon, yeah. And it's it's an interesting structure. It's a conical stone.
Yeah, it looks like a kind of like an upside down ice cream cone.
Yeah, that's a good description. Yeah, it's one of the neat old day beacons of New England, so it's a interesting feature there. And the lighthouse is built in a very beautiful style, very attractive. And I will mention it's my wife's favorite lighthouse, I think largely because of the architecture.
Perfect.
And yeah. And so she got to go with me and when I was out there 3 years ago. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little while too. But it's a beautiful building. What can you tell me about the architecture? Why was it built in that particular way?
From my understanding, there was a national contest by someone with the last name Dow, and his design of this lighthouse won. There were several built throughout New England, 3 specifically in Rhode Island, one being Rose Island Lighthouse down in Newport, Sabin Point Lighthouse, which is our neighbor and no longer standing, and then ours as well. So it's a very attractive design. Each one seems to have a little bit of a different architectural spin on them. For instance, Sabin Point was made of stone on the first level where shiplap. So
you have Colchester Reef Lighthouse on Lake Champlain in Vermont.
I'd say that's probably one of the closest ones to us.
Yeah, it is very much so. And as you probably know, that was moved from the lake to the Shelburne Museum there, so it's one people can see it up close and go get inside. There was also Penfield Reef Light in Connecticut that I think is kind of in that class, very similar to the old Sabin Point Lighthouse. So, but yeah, your closest siblings would be Rose Island and Colchester Reef, I guess. Yeah, but it's really a very attractive style. So from 1871, when it was established, into the 1950s, the lighthouse was home to civilian keepers and their families. Seems like it must have been a nice place to live. I believe there was one keeper there for 22 years, another one for 29 years, which was pretty amazing. Are there any stories that kind of stand out for you about the keepers and families that live there?
Yes. I've been reading through the logbook, so I found it very interesting that back in the turn of the century that they actually walk to and from shore during the winter. The lighthouse is about 800 feet from the bike path. Back then it was railroad tracks. But they would walk to and from the lighthouse for months at a time while it was frozen. A couple other stories that pop out are Keeper Aronson, who was keeper in the early 1900s, so about maybe 1930. He had a daughter that lived at the station, and she was too sick to be brought ashore, and she had appendicitis. and the doctors actually came out to the lighthouse and operated on her and in the kitchen table.
Wow.
She did survive, but that's a neat little story we like to tell on our tours, along with Keeper Aronson's cat, Tommy the
Yeah.
cat, who gained national attention in the newspapers of the time, around the same time period, where he would actually dive off the rocks. And these rocks are maybe about 20, 30 feet high in the bay. He would dive off the rocks and catch fish, and then climb back up on the rocks and store them under the lilac bush, which we still have on the island.
Mhm.
Did leave a couple of paw prints in some concrete that we still have out on the island as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. I remember seeing the paw prints.
Yep.
That's so cool. He's only one of two fishing cats I'm aware of at lighthouses that I've ever heard about. The other was Deer Island in Boston Harbor, lighthouse that's not there anymore. But that was like a spark plug type light, and the cat supposedly would dive off and then climb up the ladder with the fish.
Yep.
Yeah, so very, very unusual. But so many lighthouse dog stories. I'm a kind of a cat person, so I always like hearing the cat stories as well. Then, of course, after the civilian keepers left, you had the Coast Guard personnel living there, and by that time, it was male keepers only, right, under the Coast Guard.
From what I understand, yes. The Coast Guard took over the lighthouse in 1939. However, there were civilian keepers and their family that lived there until 1956. And that's when the Coast Guard kind of took over with their crew. I have been able to meet a couple of them. Of course, Dennis, as you know, who was our past chairman, he was the last light keeper, so he's been instrumental in telling us how Coast Guard life kind of was out at the Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. And it was 3 men at a time assigned to the station, with 2 on duty and 1 off duty. That seems to be, from what the other keepers tell me as well, was from 1956 up until 74.
And as you just mentioned, Dennis Tardif was one of the last Coast Guard keepers there, and then, of course, later very involved in your organization, chair of your group until you just got that position. But through Dennis, I imagine you have a pretty good picture of what life was like there for Coast Guard keepers.
Yes, very, very much so. It's a big difference from when they actually had to light the light using wicks or oil. From what Dennis has told me, it was pretty streamlined, where they just had to flick a switch each night and watch for fog banks to turn on the fog bell. And they also controlled the fog bell down at Sabin Point as well.
You've got a great team at that lighthouse. That's for sure. So how and why did the lighthouse come to be owned by Mobil Oil? That was, and remind me when that was as well. So how, when, and why did the lighthouse come to be owned by Mobil Oil, which of course is now Exxon Mobil?
They actually just sold a couple of weeks ago. I think the new company is called Global Partners.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they just sold the whole terminal.
Oh, wow. So
Haven't met any-
ExxonMobil is still ExxonMobil, but that particular terminal has been sold.
Yeah, Exxon left that area.
Oh, that's news to
I
me.
think November 1st they sold it officially.
Okay. Interesting. So just to clarify for listeners, there is a major oil terminal very close. What it must be, how close is it to the lighthouse?
I would say just as close as we are to shore, so maybe 800,000 feet.
Well, that maybe that question almost answers itself. I mean, it was so close. Was it largely a security type of issue that they decided to buy it?
From what I gathered, yes. The lighthouse was put up for sale by the government in 1980, and they accepted sealed bids, and ExxonMobil was the top bid with around $40,000, I believe the selling price was back in 1980. They held on to it up until about 2010, I believe, was when they donated it. With some restrictions, but I think it was mainly security, just because it was so close. And dealing with our research in the National Archives, there were actually plans around 1918, 1920 that they were looking to fill in the land all behind the lighthouse as well, and include that in their terminal. Those fell through, but we do have all the blueprints and plans. They were pretty serious about extending their terminal to include the entire lighthouse.
I wonder if they would have just torn down the lighthouse at that point if they did that.
No idea.
The caretakers in the 70s, who hired them?
I believe it was an arrangement with the East Providence Historical Society, where they didn't want the lighthouse falling into disrepair. So there was a local family they knew that was willing to live out there, and they lived out there, I think, for 11 months. And then someone else I believe from the same family, lived out there for a couple more years until the
Hmm.
Coast Guard kind of pulled the plug and put it up for sale.
So you just mentioned a moment ago that ExxonMobil actually donated the lighthouse, I believe at no cost, to the American Lighthouse Foundation. So as we mentioned earlier, you've now become the chairman of the Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse. You've played a lot of roles. Of course, you were the vice chair for a while, most recently, but you've played a lot of roles for the organization, and you've been involved in a lot of projects, restoration projects, and other things too. So it's probably hard to answer quickly, but what projects have you enjoyed the most there?
I'd say definitely the interior restoration. That was around 2017 to 2018. Because I got to see the lighthouse, how it looked in its abandoned state from 1980 till 2017. And I think that was really cool to be able to see the completed project after, and be able to have those memories of how it looked before and how it looks now. And I have a greater appreciation knowing how close it was to being lost. I'm also involved in the museum, so I like to pay attention to the details. So I was able to make note of where specific moldings were, or things like that, to make sure that they were accurately put back if they were missing.
Hmm.
Another one that I really liked was the Fresnel lens returning. That was a volunteer opportunity of a lifetime, to be honest, to be able to go up to Newburyport, Massachusetts, and be a part of that with Kurt Fosberg, and be able to create the lens, drive it back down to Rhode Island, put it on a boat, and bring it out to the lighthouse all in one day.
Yeah,
Then work with him on assembling it in the parlor for display.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that was amazing. I got to see the day when it was actually put on the pedestal in the museum. It was pretty exciting being there. I want to get back to that in a moment, but backing up to what you were saying about the restoration of the interior, tell me about the layers of paint that you examined.
Sure. So in our last tour season, which was 2023, last year, I'd say probably the most asked question was, are these the original colors inside the lighthouse? And at the time, the answer was no. We just fixed them up and painted them a standard color. But I did know which rooms had their original plaster. Some rooms, like such as the first floor and second floor hall, we weren't able to salvage the plaster. It was too far gone. But I did save chunks of it. For whatever reason, I just decided to save some. So when we kept getting asked those questions, I pulled out those pieces of plaster and looked under a microscope down to the first layer of paint, and was
Hmm.
able to match it to Benjamin Moore's historic color collection. And then I went out to the lighthouse, and I was able to chip away at some of the walls where I knew the plaster was still there. And I went through about a half inch of paint and old plaster down to that first layer, and was able to do the same thing and match it up. And then this
Wow,
past spring, we had some volunteers that went out, and room by room we painted it. So the first and second floor are now their original colors.
that is great. Say a half inch of paint. Any rough idea how many layers we're talking about? Must have been a lot.
I want to say in some of the upstairs bedrooms, I think I saw upwards of like 12 to 15 layers of paint,
Hmm.
spanning 150 years.
Right.
There was plenty of paint. Some colors were interesting. There was a lime green in one of the bedrooms.
That was
Um,
probably among the more outer layers under the Coast
yeah,
Guard, I would guess. Yeah.
I think that was the 70s, but
Yeah.
70s, late 60s. But it was cool to see the history.
Yeah. I've seen some pretty wild colors painted by the Coast Guard and lighthouse interiors in that era. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Right. It was the 70s were an interesting time. And you've also been involved in some painting of the exterior too, right? Am I remembering right? So the trim, possibly?
Correct. Just a couple years ago, we went back to the trim colors. The watch room was originally trim with shiplap, but in 205 and 206, they put shingled, because that was what was there when they did the restoration, and we didn't know that there was the trim carried all the way up to the tower until we started getting into the National Archives and seeing these old photos. And then we have instruction to Lightkeeper's Manual from 1900, which has the color choices, that the lighthouse is supposed to be white with lead colored trim. So we matched that up and put that back on the lighthouse as well.
That's great. I don't think too many lighthouse organizations have put that kind of, work into proper, historically correct paint. like that. That's a really good thing. And you mentioned the museum inside too. You've had a lot to do with developing the exhibits and so forth in the museum, right?
Correct. I
Yeah.
was the one that founded the museum back in 2018. When we just fixed up the lighthouse, we weren't really sure what exactly to do with the interior. We don't offer overnight stays. So we had the idea of maybe doing a museum at some point. So I formed a museum committee and we started kind of looking at how we wanted to lay out each room. And we broke it up where the first floor was going to be all about Pomham Rocks. And the second floor was going to feature the other lighthouses that no longer stand in the Providence River. And the fourth bedroom upstairs was going to feature solely the Coast Guard era of the lighthouse. The first floor kind of was the lighthouse establishment, lighthouse service years, but the Coast Guard is an equal piece of history as well to the lighthouse. And Dennis had a whole bunch of information and photographs from the 1970s on how the lighthouse looked when it was being operated by the Coast Guard. So we dedicated an entire room up there for the Coast Guard. And then from the first floor, we've just been looking for artifacts. We look for old photos of the area with lighthouses, and it's really developed into an awesome exhibit.
Yeah, that was great when I was there 3 years ago, and I imagine is more there now. So I need to get back sometime. But
Anytime.
yeah, you mentioned Bullock's Point Lighthouse. We mentioned earlier there was a lighthouse there quite a few years ago. You've got a beautiful model of Bullock's Point Lighthouse there, right? It's really quite detailed. You didn't make that, right?
I did
Oh,
actually.
you did make it?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
the project I had to do in order to graduate high school,
Oh,
Dave
okay.
Kelleher was my mentor.
Oh,
At the
okay.
time, he said, "Well, one day we want to have a museum out there and we want to feature Bullock's Point Lighthouse. So can you do your project to have a model of the lighthouse?" And I said, "Sure," not thinking it'd actually be used in the lighthouse. And I made it and I held on to it for a couple of years. And then when we finished the lighthouse, they asked for it
Yeah.
on display in the Bullocks exhibit.
If I knew you made that, it slipped my mind, but it's really beautiful. So one more thing about the restoration of the interior, I was thinking about. You showed me around when I was there in 2021. You talked about the floor work that was done on the floor, which was pretty interesting. Remind me about that. I understand, like, for some reason, part of the floor from one room was moved to another room, or just can you recap that for me?
Sure. So the way the floor is in the lighthouse is the second floor seemed to have been untouched, and it was pretty salvageable, except for the second floor landing where we had to replicate it. For some
Hmm.
reason, on the first floor in about 1940, they added a second layer of flooring, which was like 1 inch pine. And there was under that is the original 1871 flooring. During the abandoned years, there were some windows that were blown out in the kitchen, and water and wind and all the elements got through because that's what faces south when we get pretty strong southerly winds. So that flooring was completely rotted, completely gone. We didn't want to go back to the flooring underneath just because we didn't know how extensive the rot was. So we didn't know what type of can of worms we would be opening up. So the hall, which is right next to the kitchen where the staircase is, also had a window that was blown out. So some of those floorboards were also rotted, but there was a lot more that were salvageable. So we decided to take what we could from the kitchen and place it in the hall so that the hall is pretty much all 1940 original 1 inch pine, and we replicated the 1 inch pine fully in the kitchen. So it looks
Hmm.
like how it originally would have, but just the actual wood is original in the hall, just not the kitchen.
Okay, thanks for the recap on that. It looks pristine. It looks like the place was just built. So, and I'll refer people to video. I shot a lot of video that day when I was out there in 2021. And if they go on the USLHS, U.S. Lighthouse Society YouTube channel, it's on there. And I think it says Happy 150th Birthday, Pomham Rocks Lighthouse, because it was also that year was the 150th anniversary or birthday as well. So back to that lens, the lens returning to the lighthouse. That was, as you mentioned, that was a very gratifying project, I think, for everybody involved. It must have been for you.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. And Kurt Fosberg was great to work with, I think, too, wasn't he?
I would recommend him to anybody. He was awesome.
Yeah. One of the few working lampists in the country today, expert on Fresnel lenses. Yeah. And I got to, shoot video with him. He was very nice about letting me shoot video up close of him while he was working and talking about what he was doing while he was working on it. But didn't you kind of act as an assistant to him for some of that project?
I did, yes. He was teaching me how to disassemble, crate it, and kind of do some touch-up work on it as well.
Any thoughts of becoming a lampist on the side,
I
maybe?
would do it on the side, yeah. It's interesting work, and it's fun to know a piece of history that's slowly dying. So to carry that on would be pretty cool.
I think it'd be really cool. I'd love to see you get into that. So remind me what was done. I know the pedestal that was in the lantern, was that brought to the museum and a new pedestal was made for upstairs? Is that correct? Or
Yes, so the pedestal, which housed the lens from 1926 until 1974,
hmm
the lens was removed. They left the pedestal in the tower. It's a very heavy, it's about 300 pounds. It's steel and brass. And they left that in the tower, which the light then went on when we relit it in 2006. And in order to put the lens together, we wanted to make sure it would work and hold the weight of the lens. So, what better option than to bring down the original pedestal that was used with that lens? So we did block and tackle with Kurt and brought it down 3 stories. It wasn't easy, but we did it.
yeah.
Reunited it in the parlor with the lens, and we originally had a sixth order Fresnel lens from 1871 to 1926. So we had a replica sixth order pedestal put in the tower.
hmm
We had an 1873 inspection report which described exactly how tall that pedestal was. So Kurt was able to replicate it exactly.
And of course, that day when I was there, and the lens was actually Kurt finished the work he was doing to prepare the lens to put on the pedestal, and the lens was moved from like a crate it was sitting on, I believe, to the pedestal.
Mhm.
And I got to watch and take video of that. But you and was it three or four other guys, including Kurt, lifted the lens up and put it on the pedestal, right?
I think it took four of us to get
Yeah,
it. It was very awkward to hold because you can't touch the glass.
right.
And there's only so many places you could put your hands, and
Well,
it weighed about 300 pounds, so it was very awkward to carry.
yeah, better to touch the glass than to drop it, though, I would think.
Exactly.
Yeah, it was suspenseful watching that, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
But I had full confidence. But man, it was interesting. It was fun in a scary kind of way.
It was
Uh,
fun, but I was relieved when it actually got on the pedestal.
yeah, yeah. I have some history with that lens. I go way back with the Custom House Maritime Museum in Newburyport, Mass,
Yeah.
where that was exhibited for years. A friend of mine had a wedding there in the museum, and people even back then, it's a long time ago, people knew I was into lighthouses. So somebody called me and said, got my attention and said, "Come on into this room. There's a lighthouse lens on display here." So I went in there. A bunch of people crowded in that room, and somebody said, "Look, there's a plug there. You can plug it in, and a light will come on." So I did that. The light was blinding.
I
And
believe
everybody like screamed, turn that light off. Yeah, so
it.
that's a memory I have associated with that lens. But it's so good that it went back to its original home. So you mentioned the idea of possibly getting a replica of a sixth order lens made to display. Has there been, I guess it would be Dan Spinella in Florida who specializes in making those if you were going to do that.
Yeah.
So,
One day, but we have plenty of other projects that precede that,
oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
such as our dock and all that. So
Yeah, well, I understand you had some damage to the dock was that in the storms this past January? Is that right?
our storm that damaged it was December 2023.
Right. December 23, not 22. It's confusing because there's been so many of these bad storms in recent years. There was this storm December 23rd, 22 that wiped out the
Actually,
footbridge.
it was that one. It
It
was
was
that
that
one.
one. Okay.
Yeah.
I know they start to blur in together and it's hard for
No.
me to remember which happened when. So December 22 wiped out your dock there.
The dock's still there. We did lose a couple of boards and it exposed a lot more rot. What kind of happened is the dock went underwater, maybe about 2.5, 3 feet. And our dock setup is we have the 1939 dock, which replaced the original, which was lost in the hurricane of 38.
hmm
And that's a stationary standing dock. It doesn't go up and down with the tide. And we have two floating docks attached to it. The two floating docks are fine, but during the height of the storm, the gangway, walkway, whatever you'd like to call it, was up at about 45-degree, 50-degree angle, because that's how high the tide got. So the standing wharf from 1939 was submerged, and all the boards kind of popped. Some did settle, some floated off, so we lost a couple. But when we went out there, they didn't settle completely right, and they kind of pulled out a lot of nails. You could see them, some of the nails, they were standing about 5 to 6 inches up. That's how far the boards came off. They were pretty substantial nails. I think they're only about 8 inches long. So we're very close to losing the whole top of the dock. We did what we could to repair it. We've kind of roped off that section so tourists or any visitors can't go on it. And we have another walkway over the wooden ramp, so you don't use that anymore. But we are looking into and hopefully going to replace soon the entire dock as well.
One other thing about that storm, didn't like a large rock itself, part of the island itself, fall off in that storm? Is that?
Yes. So
Yeah.
we had a section kind of below where the lilac bush was, where Tommy the cat would put his fish. I want to say it's maybe about like an 8 by 8 foot section of ledge kind of just collapsed off and revealed kind of a crack in the rock. So we're looking at options on how to kind of stabilize that, fill it with a riprap, whatever it be.
Yeah.
It's held so far. We haven't done anything. So we're hoping buys us some time until we kind of wrap our heads around how to stabilize that before we lose any more.
Yeah. It's a little scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, I mentioned earlier the storms this past January, but those were more in northern New England. Have you had any other bad storms do any damage since then, since
Uh,
2022?
Not really. The dock's gone underwater a couple of times, but nothing to the extent that it was in December of 2022. We've had some high king tides as well, but again, the dock seems to have held up for now.
And another thing, speaking of the weather, you mentioned earlier about how some of the people years and years ago used to walk back and forth on the ice to the lighthouse. That never happens anymore, does it?
Not to the extent that you're able to walk on it. I've seen it once during our restoration of 2017, 2018. The bay did freeze, but not to the point where I would trust walking out. But there was an ice shelf from the bike path to the island.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be the one to test it to see if it's cold, but uh,
Yeah.
yeah, other than that, the bay doesn't freeze anymore.
Yeah. Same thing in like Long Island Sound and various harbors around New England. I've read, stories about lighthouses like I think the ones near Norwalk, fairly out in Long Island Sound, people would drive their cars out around the lighthouse in the winter. So
I've heard the same thing in Narragansett Bay as well. Yep.
yeah. So let's move on to talking about the accessibility of the lighthouse. Can you tell me how the public tours work there?
So we offer tours on a seasonal basis. They go from June to September. We don't offer them every day. They're kind of sporadic throughout the week. So there might be a weekend, there might be a weekday. This past year, we've had one tour per day that we do it, and they run about an hour and 45 minutes, I believe. We do them about 1 in the afternoon, and it's been pretty successful. We've had, I think, a 91% capacity rate this past tour season, which is pretty good in my book.
Yeah.
And they're able to book tours online. We'll release the dates around March every year, and you can go from there.
How long a boat ride is it to get out there?
It's about a 7 or 8 minute boat ride. We keep our boat across the bay at Edgewood Yacht Club in Cranston, and it's in direct view of the lighthouse. There's just no docks or yacht clubs on the side that the lighthouse is on, so
Yeah.
the other side is also a beautiful spot as well.
Yep, that's where we went out from the time I went out. So you're actually one of the boat captains as well, right? And you don't have enough to do.
I know.
Yeah.
I do have a life, I swear. But I
But
am one of the boat captains as well. And the way the Coast Guard classified our launch was that we had to basically get a license as if we were a ferry. So we each had to get 50-ton captain's licenses in order to operate our boat. Even though the boat's only 26 feet long, we have to get a 50-ton license.
did you have a boating background before that?
I never stepped on a boat till I went to the lighthouse, so no.
But how often do you run some of the tours out there?
I usually do the weekend ones because the weekday ones are around 1 in the afternoon. And I have a job, so I can't I can't do it. But I do
Yeah.
volunteer for the weekend ones.
Uh-huh. What is that job?
I work in finance in
Uh-huh.
Boston, so
You work in Boston.
I do. Yep.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. That's a little bit of a commute. Well, an hour, right? Depending on the traffic.
I take the train, so
Oh, okay.
I only have to go in twice a week. I was working in Rhode Island, but I had an opportunity to take a job in Boston. I took it.
In the financial district in Boston?
BU, so I work down there, kind of like Fenway.
Cool. Yeah, I'm a Boston guy from
Yeah,
way back.
I like it.
Worked in Boston several places and went to school there and everything else. So congratulations on working in Boston. But back to bringing tours out there, you probably have a lot to do with actually running the tours as well. Is that right? Are you also a tour guide?
Yes, the person who runs the museum, which is me, also runs the docent program. So we
Hmm.
have a team of volunteer docents that I train each year to learn about the lighthouse's history, the artifacts that we keep in there, and kind of how the tours go. And they are awesome. They're very dedicated, knowledgeable. Judianne Point, who I believe you've had on your podcast had on your podcast before, she does an excellent job running the actual tours. So she's our tour director.
Yeah.
So she'll handle all the bookings and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, Judy Ann's great. She's actually co-hosted a few times the
Yep.
podcast and been a guest as well. So what a great team. I know there's a lot of other people, as you say, who do important work and out there, but you two are just world-class volunteers, I would say. So there's a license plate, right? There's a Pomham Rocks Lighthouse license plate. What can you tell me about that?
Ever since I was involved in Pomham, there was always talk of, oh, what if we got a license plate? What if we got a license plate? And no one ever really tried. So for our 150th, I had the idea of maybe if we could actually try and get one. The process turned out to be a lot more in depth than I could have ever imagined. It took 4 years for us to get to this point. I had to talk with local legislators in the Senate and House of Representatives to get bills introduced, passed on committees. The governor had to sign a bill authorizing it. And then that's when the fun started with working with the Department of Motor Vehicles and the state police to get an approved design. And then from there, we had to collect a certain amount of pre-orders in order for them to start making our plate. And that whole process took us about 4 years from start until finish. And we
Hmm.
just started distributing them October 5th of this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did you do that design?
I worked with another board member, Anne Green. So
Okay.
she's actually a graphic designer. We have a person pretty much for everything.
Yeah.
So I came up with the design for this plate. It wasn't our first design. We had others, but like I said, working with the DMV and state police, we had to find the correct design. There's a lot of guidelines that I would have never guessed on going into making a license plate.
Sure, it varies state to state too, but yeah. Well, it's a really nice accomplishment and a nice way to raise some more money. So a lot of restoration has been completed, as we're talking about, exterior and interior, the museum and everything else. But it's never finished, of course, at a place like this. There's always something that needs to be done. Is there anything kind of in the pipeline at this point?
I'd say our number one priority and what we're going to be focusing on now is the dock. We just finished adding shutters back to the lighthouse, and that just finished a couple of weeks ago. So now that we can turn the page on that, we're going to be going 100% on figuring out our dock situation. So that's in the pipeline. And then after the dock's figured out, we did just receive a lease license from the United States Coast Guard on the Pomham Beacon. We've noticed in the past couple of years that it's been deteriorating. We did notice a couple of the local fire departments. They were using their fireboat actually as using the beacon for target practice, which was kind of loosening up some of the mortar, and we've noticed some of the stones at the base falling out. So we kind of were a little proactive on getting a license to try to preserve it. We've been working with those towns, and they've agreed to not use it as target practice anymore. But we are gonna shift gears over to the beacon after the dock.
Wow. When you say target practice, you're talking about with hoses, with
Yeah.
water, I hope, not
Yeah.
machine guns or anything like that.
No. The hoses on their fireboats they're using to spray down the beacon. Yep.
Yeah. Little history around there of that. The fire department, I believe, actually were the ones who destroyed the Sabin Point Lighthouse as an exercise, if I remember
They sure
right.
did. They burned it for the 4th of July in 1968, and then they dynamited the granite base.
Yeah. Well, nothing against the fire department. Fire
No,
departments
no, not at
anywhere.
all.
We love fire departments, of course, and everything they do for us. But it's kind of a that was then, this is now. But I'm glad you guys are stepping in on behalf of that day beacon, because it's not as glamorous as a lighthouse, but it's got its own history for sure, a long history. So that's good news. So your brother Adam is a
Yes,
younger brother, correct?
correct.
Yeah, is also a volunteer. What kind of things does he do there?
He's a first mate on our tours. He's also on our museum committee as well. He volunteers doing maintenance with me. We're the two that put up the Christmas lights and the crazy ones that go up on the giant ladders to hang the lights.
Oh yeah.
And he's also the treasurer for the organization. He has an economics background and accounting background, so he's taken treasurer last year.
I'm glad you mentioned the Christmas lights, because I've seen some pictures lately. It's incredible. It's really beautiful what you do there. Yeah. Somebody just posted one on the U.S. Lighthouse Society Facebook page with reflections in the waters of the water of the lights. It's
Oh, I
very
did see
beautiful.
that one. Yep,
Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful.
So you're doing a really good job with that. So I have two final questions for you for bonus points. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So the next to last bonus question is, why do you think that Pomham Rocks Lighthouse needs to be saved?
I think it's a huge historical landmark, not even just our town, but Narragansett Bay as a whole. There used to be 30 lighthouses. Now we're down to 21. And it's sad to see some of the stories where they get neglected or no one takes care of them and they just fall by the wayside. And I think it's a huge link to the past where nowadays people don't appreciate their importance. From me driving a boat, I've gone to the lighthouse at night and I can't imagine if that's the only light that I'm seeing, how much I would rely on it, knowing all the navigational hazards in the water. So from that, I would highly recommend saving any lighthouse you could.
Sure, absolutely. So final question for bonus points is, what has been your personal favorite thing or things about your association with Pomham Rocks Lighthouse?
I'd say meeting everybody, all the volunteers, the board members, everyone has their own story, everyone has their own specialty. Like I said, we pretty much have a volunteer for everything from graphic design to engineering to carpentry. So seeing and meeting these people that I normally wouldn't in my line of work has been very neat because I've learned things that I wouldn't have. And I'm sure they've learned things that they wouldn't have. And it kind of, I think, brings the community more together. With all these people with different walks of life, and they kind of all have shared this common goal of just saving and restoring the lighthouse. It's pretty cool to get out there and get them all together and mingle and do what you love. So I'd say meeting the people is my favorite thing.
Yeah. Well, as we've said a couple of times, you got a great team there for sure. And, I've said it to a number of guests in this podcast. I say it a lot. But often when I ask that question, people say something about the people involved, similar answers. And it is always about the people, whether it's you're looking at history or looking at the present day volunteers and staff at these places. It's the people that, bring it to life and make it so worthwhile. So, Alex Dias, congratulations again on becoming chairman of Friends of Portsmouth. That's my lighthouse. That's my local lighthouse. I'm becoming chairman of Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse, and you've done so much for that place and the lighthouse itself, and that organization's lucky to have you. So, Alex, again, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Check out pomhamrockslighthouse.org for more information on tours, as well as how to volunteer or donate to Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse.
So I've got to remind myself to say Pomham rather than Pomham.
Well, I always say Pomham, but sometimes I say, locally they say Pomham, so it's, yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky. There's all these different hams on Cape Cod. There's Chatham, and nobody says Chatham. But there's Wareham and East Ham, and in those cases they say
and
East Ham.
And Hingham.
There's Dedham and Hingham, right? So you got to know locally how people say it.
It depends on my mood, but most people in Riverside say Pomham, so it depends whom I'm talking to.
All right, I'm going to try hard to say Pomham, although it sounds odd to me, but I'll try. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
So you've been involved with Friends of Pomham Rocks Lighthouse for quite a while now, Judianne. You've seen the work of Alex Dias up close. Anything you'd like to add before we move along here?
Well, Alex does a lot of good things, but there are three things in particular that are conducive to him being in a leadership role. First thing I'd say is his youth. Now, that's not to say that older people can't get things done. We know that does happen. However, looking towards the future, it is nice to attract younger people so that that preservation will continue. He also has amazing enthusiasm. He runs the work parties and the work that we get done out there. He always has another project in mind. It's really amazing. And he has incredible knowledge. Not just knowledge about Pomham Rocks Lighthouse, but lighthouses in general. So, yeah, he's going to do a fantastic job for us.
I agree. He and people like him, and there are not a lot of people like him, but are the future, certainly, of lighthouse preservation. And we're always looking for ways to attract younger people. So it's always really refreshing when somebody like Alex comes along. So big hats off to Alex.
To Alex and his brother Adam. He's right
and
there.
And Adam, yeah.
And right there next to him, doing just as much work. It's
Absolutely.
Really...
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. I don't want to shortchange Adam.
No, he's amazing too.
Yeah. So before we sign off today, I wanted to mention something I was thinking about, something I think about all the time. I think about it more and more, about whether lighthouses still have relevance in our world today. I was looking for things online about people's ideas about the symbolism of lighthouses, and I found something I really liked. It's from the website of Beaver Dam Woodworks, a company that makes lawn lighthouses. And I'm going to give you the task of reading that quote. Could you read it, Judianne?
Yes. Okay. Lighthouses inspire hope, especially during difficult times. Their steady light embodies the promise of a brighter future and the belief that there is always a path forward. Applicable to our day-to-day lives, the image of a lighthouse reminds us that this too shall pass and that better days are ahead. They stand for resilience, reminding us to stay positive and persevere through life's challenges.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty much the answer to my question about the relevance of lighthouses. If anything, I would say lighthouses have more relevance than ever in our world today. We need all the hope and resilience we can find.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Amen to your amen. So, Judianne, thank you so much for helping with the podcast. Again, it's always a complete pleasure.
It's my pleasure, Jeremy. And I just want to remind everyone to check out uslhs.org to find out more about all the things the U.S. Lighthouse Society does, including tours and preservation grants. Don't forget that donations and memberships support the Society's education and preservation missions, including this podcast.
Many thanks to everyone out there who works to preserve history. We are all on the same team. In 2 weeks, we'll hear a conversation with California author and historian Desiree Hevereau. Until then, to all our regular listeners and our new ones, thanks so much for listening and
keep a good light.